What? Out of nowhere, I saw a hand gripping a knife swing toward me. My heart didn't have time to stop before I began to see the motion slowly. Without being able to give it any thought, I turned my whole body around as fast as possible. I felt a breeze at my side from the swipe whiffing. I looked up to witness Shiria's expression progressively changing to a terrified mask. As fast as my worn-out body left me, I dashed to her and grabbed her hand, running the opposite direction. We ran as fast as possible and began to hear a third person coming from behind us. We were being chased. The distance between us and the attacker was minimal. While we desperately dashed, we saw the elevator and the floor 4 staircase in front of us. I was certain we weren't going to have time to open the elevator and use it before being caught. The staircase was our single option. I put my whole focus on running as hard as I could, tightly gripping Shiria's hand. Without a doubt, the person we heard behind us had tried to kill me. But who is it? Before we reached the stairs, I let go of her hand and prayed we could go up fast enough. Halfway up, the crisp steps below us let us know the attacker hadn't given up and would continue to chase us. My heart began to run faster than I'd ever felt it. Despite how unreal it seemed, the idea that someone around us wanted our death had proven correct. As soon as we reached the higher floor, we took off again. I looked to my side, ensuring that Shiria was still okay. She met my look with terror, not a trace of wooziness remaining in her. What had we done, and why had we been attacked? A myriad of similar questions flooded my mind as we kept running through the straightaway. Even though the bathrooms could be locked from the inside, Pate had said that his key opened all of them. We were most definitely being chased by his killer, who could have picked it up or could go back to the security room to do so. Entering the partitions would only doom us too. Instead, with the distance between us and our attacker beginning to extend, we did our best not to slow down for even a second. Let's go to the attic. In a hoarse voice, I let out what I had intended to be reassuring words that I couldn't finish off. I'd realized our only chance relied on the attic. The key should have still been there, so if we could keep the same pace until we arrived at it, we'd have enough time to lock ourselves inside. Once more, we forced our exhausted bodies up the floor 5 staircase while the adrenaline's effect started to wear off. I desperately needed to slow down, but I pushed myself more than I'd ever thought I could. I wasn't going to die. I repelled that thought more than anything. I grabbed Shiria's hand again and sprinted toward the partitions. We hadn't come to the tower to die, it had been the complete opposite. Almost 4 hours remained, and the footfalls behind us continually warned us how badly someone wanted us dead. Despite their lower speeds, they were still running. We had to go to the attic. That was our only way to survive. Somehow the culprit had a knife. As soon as I considered how nonsensical that was, a flash of Erina's death came to me. There had been a bloodstain on her chest, and although we hadn't inspected it, the same knife must have taken her life. The last staircase we'd have to power through was in reach. Shiria's body began to tremble as a sign of how much she'd pushed herself to escape from the danger of death. Only one more. We'll lock ourselves up in the attic. My mind started to feel numb as soon as I spat out some words. She nodded almost imperceptibly, while the terrifying echo of our persistent attacker refused to fade. I stepped up the stairs, unable to match the prior pace. Our bodies couldn't withstand much more. As much as I tried to keep up for just a few more seconds, my legs were barely responding. Seeing how the same thing was happening to Shiria, I feared that our lack of sleep would finally catch up to us. I hadn't been able to see the body of the attacker, but there weren't many options. They were chasing us with a knife, so we weren't going to die without knowing our killer's identity. We stepped onto the 6th floor and resumed what could no longer be called running, but a forced stagger. Fortunately, our attacker must have been in similar shape, as they hadn't used their exhaustion to catch up despite their continuous audible steps. It's still there. The attic's door was open and I could see the shining key placed in it. Merely wishing not to faint, we forced the last sprint as we heard the noise behind us growing louder. My body had already given out, but thankfully too late to spell disaster for me. I took the key and entered the narrow staircase with Shiria right behind me. As fast as I could, I shut the door and inserted the key in the inner keyhole. With a trembling hand, I turned and locked it. As soon as the tumbler clicked, I stopped trying to control my body and collapsed between the 2 walls. You okay? We spent a full minute catching our breath, during which no other sound reached our ears. Even though we'd achieved our only available goal, in case the culprit had another key to the attic, there'd be nothing we could do. I'm fine, let's go up. I stood up as soon as I felt able to. Still staggering, we began walking up the stairs to distance ourselves as much as possible from the door. The culprit hadn't even tried to open it after chasing us the entire way up, which made it all even more unsettling. You didn't see their face, right? No, I only saw a knife coming out of the corridor, and I think their sleeve was black. They must have had it hidden somewhere. Their sleeve was black, huh? I'm looking at someone with a black sleeve right now. I'm not sure, but it could have only been Akuro or Sai, and an early experience told me that I run faster than Sai, which I very much doubt is the case with Akuro. It has to be him then. I didn't know what to think. Someone had really tried to take my life when I had done nothing. Was I a threat, or was the culprit just a psychopath? If it had been Sai, I couldn't honestly decide. I don't know, but we might be safe here. I looked by my feet. No new footprints had been left since the last time we'd looked at the floor. There's supposed to be only one key for this place, but who can really tell? Duplication is a trivial matter at this point. At least if the culprit hasn't made a duplicate yet, they won't be able to do it now. We could be alright. I'm not sure. If this is the same culprit who's been using the Sekimeiya all this time, I'm certain they'd have a way to replicate the key even if we have it with us. If the culprit is Sai, for example, he could go back to the past and replicate his body during a time he was holding it. The pale fear projected on her face for a single instant was more than soul-crushing. I'd been with her for so many years and never seen anything like it, not even recently. That was why I didn't voice the much scarier way the culprit could have made their way in. By traveling from the future, they could deliberately materialize themselves in the attic if the location was simply based on the time they'd been there. Let's make sure we're alone. Yeah. No matter who the attacker had been, two people would still be unaccounted for between Sai and Akuro and the other Shiraya. We'd been in the attic just a couple minutes earlier, but it wasn't impossible that someone else had also been present at the time. We quietly walked around while a piercing feeling invaded my chest. Erna and Kate had recently died. I'd barely been able to accept it, and their killer had shifted to targeting us, the last people remaining. I truly hoped that at 2100 the police would come. I needed to get out with Shiraya at that time. There was no way I could make it even a second longer without breaking down. My heart still racing, I went to the hallway through the kitchen and looked at the storeroom while Shiraya stayed in the corner. After I'd seen the empty bathroom, we'd isolated the two bedrooms. I'll go up the ladder, stay here. She came to the two parallel doors and looked at me while I climbed up the ladder of the rightmost bedroom. I was easily able to confirm nobody was hiding. I repeated the process in the opposite one to conclude that we were the only people in the attic. Shiraya joined me inside. Our lives were at risk of being cut short, but we couldn't do anything else. She sat on a bed, knowing that we could have been in the path of an unstoppable force. No. But life wouldn't pity us. Before he could speak any words, a heart-stopping sound came from the hallway. For a terrified whisper, Shiraya's raw anguish tore at the foundations of my will. The sound had made it clear. We were dealing with the real culprit, who had been able to enter our makeshift fortress. Trying to escape was futile. But I couldn't think of anything else. During the few seconds in which the approaching footsteps grew louder, only a single course of action came to me. The key! We need to lock ourselves in again. An equally terrified whisper came from within me. I rushed to the drawers where the key to the bedroom should have been. The bedroom we were in didn't have a chain, and crossing the hallway was too risky. What? It's not here! The bathroom's door was opened and closed. The culprit was searching for us. Within my panic, I remembered it. Sai tried to use that bedroom's key to unlock the opposite door, and we hadn't seen where he'd left it afterward. Another door was opened. It wasn't ours, but the one in front, leading to the bedroom where we'd spent more than an hour locked inside. Fuck. We could shut the culprit inside with the key, but entering to get it might be too dangerous. We need to leave. As I said that, I took my shoes off and gestured at Shiraya to quickly do the same. We'd been able to hear the approaching culprit because of their shoes. Without them, walking on wood would be almost imperceptible. I looked through the door and heard movements coming from the other bedroom. We didn't have much time. Shiraya and I nodded at each other and left while making the least amount of noise possible, holding our shoes with our hands. We approached the living room and began to increase our speed. The culprit had somehow entered the attic, but we didn't know which method they'd used. If they'd taken the elevator, it could have still been there, but we couldn't afford the risk of having to wait for it to come. Without giving it much thought, we entered the living room. As soon as we did, the dry noise of footsteps on wood froze us in place again. They were coming to us. Instead of entering the other bedroom, very faint footsteps were approaching the living room where we were. Wait. What? No, we can't rush out. We might be going up against Psy and he wouldn't let us escape like this. If he entered the attic with another key, he could be luring us to the staircase. We'd been so desperate that I left our key on the floor next to the attic door. If Psy had managed to enter and had then locked the door, if he'd also picked up our key, we couldn't leave, and we could just corner ourselves by walking down the stairs. I glanced down and saw footprints that didn't belong to us. The culprit had definitely walked through that floor after our arrival. The terror locked my muscles in place. While the sound got closer, I began to explore the thought of attacking the culprit as soon as they entered the living room. Fuck, why didn't I think about this? They have a knife and I can't just tell Shiria to help me. We can't go that way. She'd been telling me to hurry up with her eyes, but that could have sealed it all. I grabbed her available hand and dashed to the kitchen. What are you doing? Trying to leave through the main door didn't sound right, but we might have already been done for. The only other way out, the elevator, could have also been taken care of. The culprit had waited a couple minutes before making their entrance, so if they'd used them to disable the elevator below us, we would have been completely trapped. From the kitchen we heard the living room's door being opened. We had to make our move. If they look at the footprints, it's possible they could see that we're in the kitchen. We have to get out of here. But a different thought came to me. If they recognized the footprints and anticipated our actions, they could wait in the hallway, knowing we'd immediately leave. It was too late, as I'd already grabbed Shira's hand and I wasn't able to stop mine from turning the handle of the door. The hallway was empty, but we could see the open door to the living room. With very little time to think, I could only come up with two courses of action. Do we go to the other bedroom where you can lock the door, or do we try to use the elevator? I couldn't decide. Once again, I considered that we might have been facing Psy, who'd taken some time to think up a strategy specifically so that we couldn't run away. He could have simply disabled the elevator on a lower floor to block off that escape method. But he'd just left the bedroom, and earlier I put the key inside the drawer where we'd found it. What if he just took it and going there will trap us as well? We had the chain, but it was unreliable. We'd seen how Acro had burst through it in 5 seconds. Not only that, but even though we were supposed to possess the single key to the attic, the culprit had managed to make their way in. The same thing could repeat in the bedroom. Earlier, Acro and Psy had escaped with its key, and we knew they'd then activated the Sekimeiya in some way. It was possible they'd even produced a spare key already. Let's try the elevator. Trying to call it is all we can do. If it doesn't come, we'll have to leave. Okay. My heartbeat running wild inside my ears almost drowned out our voices. The culprit hadn't entered the kitchen, meaning that they were either in the living room or the staircase. We'd have to pass through the open door to get to the elevator, so we had to hope they'd gone down the stairs and wouldn't see us. In an instant, we were on the other side. I'd been able to glance through the door and had seen an empty living room. We sped up toward the elevator, but I stopped myself as soon as I remembered something. Huh? Oh, wait, this could be bad. Everything could have been a trap, and even though we were in close proximity to a killer, we had to attempt to think rationally. We'd been instinctively running away to gain time, but we knew that was utterly pointless if every place was in reach of them. There was one goal we could strive for. The noise behind us resumed. Again, the culprit was approaching. We don't have time to run to the elevator and hope it's either here or functioning. This is definitely a trap. I opened the storeroom and dashed inside. Through the gap of the door, we could see the hallway. The sound of the culprit's movement still reached our ears, but it had become too hard to discern the way they were going. They're not coming here. I think it's very possible that after we left the event room, the Sekimeiya was taken out. We have to rely on that and try to find it since we don't have the key to open the cabinet. If we find it, we can choose a place to stay hidden until we're unavoidably found. Then we can activate it. If we go far into the past, we won't be able to think of ambushing the culprit knowing where they'll be, since it would contradict them finding us, but we could make it outside the tower if we're lucky enough. If we travel to the recent past, we could find a new place to hide that the culprit would have just looked at. It would only be buying us more time, but it's better than having to confront someone with a knife or keep exhausting ourselves. This has to work. On the 3rd floor, the attacker was by the partition's corner, and not in the staircase next to the elevator. That must have been done either to look at us from afar or to prevent us from going down to the crystal floor. They wanted to chase us up instead of down. Eventually, every sound faded away, and we could only hear our shaking breaths. In the cramped storeroom, we had to prepare for what our next and most important move would be. Why is the culprit not moving anymore? Are they waiting for us? Did we try to call the elevator? No, I remembered how this all started when I stopped myself. We were going down with the elevator and stopped on floor 3 because someone called it knowing we were inside. No matter who the culprit is, at this point they must have thought of disabling the elevator under us so that we can't use it to escape. If, despite that, we called the elevator and it came, we'd have to be sure that it's a trap and that they intend to do the same thing as before. As soon as we go down, they could call it. The last time they waited next to the partitions, but this time I'm sure they'd be right outside to make sure we can't continue moving. Think about it. It's also possible we're facing two people, Akro and Sai. If one of them is on the floor under us, they could be hoping we take the elevator to have us in the narrowest of corners. But there's nothing else we can do, is there? Assuming the elevator hasn't been used again, it should still be on floor 3. If the culprit or one of them is waiting next to the floor 6 elevator and we called it from here, they'd hear it going up. Then they'd know we'd be about to board it and use it so they could call it to intercept us. I was experiencing the most unsettling silence possible. Waiting in the storeroom wasn't an option, so I could only find 3. Trying to use the elevator to go down, trying to lock ourselves in a bedroom, and trying to leave the attic through the main door. The culprit wasn't moving. They could have been close by or far away. Regardless, it was certain they'd thought of a course of action to apprehend us. Why would they have stopped searching for us when it's certain we're in the attic? It could mean that the culprit is working alone. If they put an end to the search to ambush us, it could mean nobody is working with them or their partner would have covered that job while the other kept trying to find us. So where are they waiting? No matter who we're dealing with, they aren't stupid. They must have grabbed the bedroom key just now, so going there is too obvious of a mistake. If the elevator is working, it means they have a way to cover us going down. It sounds illogical, but trying to walk out could be the best idea. It doesn't make sense to think they're just outside of the storeroom waiting for us to leave. That implies they know we're somewhere around, and if they did, they would be rushing in. After all, earlier they were opening every room. This means that for some reason they might have left the attic. Even though we're exhausted, we're also faster than them. We should be able to run away again if they see us on the floor below, where there's more space. I thought about going to a bedroom to pick up a screwdriver. It was the only weapon I could think of, but I abandoned the thought. It was no match against a knife, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt that going back to a bedroom was a bad idea. Furthermore, if the culprit had taken the key, they might have done the same with the screwdriver, a clear weapon we could obtain. Let's go, we'll try to leave through the main entrance. Shira responded with a confused look, but she didn't object. We had to hope that out of the few options we had, one would let us live. I wasn't confident I'd picked the right one, but I knew that would have applied with all of them. We stepped into the hallway, praying that the faint noise our feet produced wasn't being conveyed to the attacker. Every corner made my heart stop, and my senses were in higher alert than they'd ever been. Knowing a knife could suddenly swing at any time, we took short steps forward until we saw the entire empty hallway. But our terror couldn't subside yet. Silently, I peeked into the living room and let out a long coming breath as soon as I saw it empty. Okay, we need to leave. The tension I felt when I found myself in the middle of the living room was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. From 3 different doors, a killer could have suddenly rushed in. We paid attention to our full surroundings until the staircase came into view. Nobody was there, but I knew I had to look for something else. That's our key. On the floor, the key we'd used to lock ourselves in showed that the culprit hadn't taken it. We can leave at least. Making it to wherever the Sekimeiya was still felt like the single goal we could attempt to achieve. We started to walk down at the same time. At the bottom, I crouched to pick up the key, but midway through, I realized we wouldn't need it to leave. The door wasn't closed. Look, this settles it. The culprit has another key for this door, and that's how they entered. While they could have teleported inside and unlocked the door with our own key, they wouldn't have left it behind. I reached for the door and began to push it from a distance so that I'd be able to quickly turn around if someone was behind it. But nobody was. The barren scenery of floor 6 felt almost harmless, although nothing would have made us lower our guard. Wait 1 second. Jiria turned around and grabbed the attic key from the floor. Then from the outside she locked it. It could be that the culprit's still inside. They've disabled the elevator, there's a small chance I just locked them in. If they already left, it could even lead them to think that we shut ourselves inside again. It was a good little idea. She put the key in her purse, and attaching ourselves to the left wall, we picked up a fairly brisk pace, intending to reach the crystal floor. Every floor was packed with perilous turns where our attacker could have been waiting, and I found it very likely they could have been near an elevator door, expecting us to use it at any point. We circled through the entire 6th floor and went down the first staircase. We still had our shoes in our hands, so we were making the least amount of noise possible. Unfortunately, the strong echo amplified our steps enough to nullify the effect. Running through floor 5, I thought of what we'd do if the Sekimeiya hadn't been taken from the cabinet. Unable to undo our own lock, we'd be done for. Going to the security room to attempt to pick up Kate's bathroom key would be the last thing we could depend on. However, it was very likely the culprit had taken it. We made it to floor 4. We continually made a series of turns moving down through the building. Meanwhile, I kept trying to force out the thought that any of the plain walls could be the last thing we ever saw. The same knife, the same breeze at my side. After leaving the partitions, as if the culprit had teleported behind me, I saw another missed swing that had been incredibly close to taking my life. It had happened again, a sudden ambush. Shiria let out a cry at my side. We didn't stop running, but something had taken my desire to react. That time, I'd seen it. The hand that had been gripping the knife and a wristwatch. Then the voice of the person who tried to kill me broke out and resounded through the entire floor. "Atsuki, you son of a bitch!" Sai's voice echoed in my mind. Without stopping, we turned our heads around to see an enraged expression full of malice. Then his body took off behind us, knife in hand. The chase resumed. Shiria and I sprinted as fast as we could toward the staircase to floor 3, while the fact that Sai had been the one to try to kill me forced its way into my mind. Why? And why then? His face had made it clear that trying to ask would be our end. However, as soon as I forced my body to move, it rejected my action. I understood there was no way I could run for much longer, and the same must have applied for Shiria. As we headed toward the staircase, I thought of something. Sai's pretty far behind. It's very likely the elevator is still on floor 3, just under the stairs, since Shiria called it before we were attacked. If it is, this time we could have time to enter it before he can catch us. It sounded feasible. As soon as we got to the lower floor, we could attempt to open the elevator. If Sai had disabled it, it was likely still there, and we concluded that he'd probably entered the attic through the main door, meaning that the elevator hadn't been up there. It might have been risky, but our bodies were on the verge of giving up, our lives balanced on a knife's edge. Even if Akro is working with Sai, as long as the elevator is here, that shouldn't be a problem. If Sai is really working with him, what's likely is that Akro was the one to go to the attic, while Sai waited here to ambush us. The way it had happened, I imagined Sai had been hiding inside the first partition, waiting for us to pass by. We began to speed down the stairs while I tried to decide on what to do. Sai hadn't started to chase us until he yelled my name, which had created enough distance between us to seriously consider the elevator. Despite that, it still felt off. Our attacker had been confirmed to be Sai, who'd proven not to let many things slip by him. The elevator wasn't particularly fast, but most importantly, would he really let us use it? Even though we could outrun him at full speed, trying to open the elevator could have lost us enough time, considering we weren't going to be able to keep running for long. God damn it. Right, here's the next one. I want to try to enter the elevator. We can't outrun him. Atsuki and Shiria lived in a delicate universe. A single modification could collapse the complex structure they were climbing. However, the structure could be partially frozen and then changed. This universe will be frozen, and that will permit its observation. A universe that would collapse if set in motion. Rules have to be bent abstractly. The flow must stop. Only that will allow an impossibility. Ultimately, just before stepping onto the 3rd floor, Atsuki changed his mind. He was exhausted, and at that point the elevator seemed safe. 1 second, I'll try to open the elevator. Shiria had also been thinking about it, but she hadn't thought that Atsuki would attempt to use it. It was next to the staircase, so it didn't take him very long to confirm it. The elevator was still on the 3rd floor, and it hadn't been disabled. He opened it and its empty interior came into their view. Alright, get in. Before Sai could catch them, both of them boarded the elevator. They had enough time to press a button, but that was yet another decision to make. They looked at the panel and decided to touch one of the 8 available buttons. 8? Oh, you kidding me. Stay inside the elevator. That sounds interesting. I don't know what exactly its purpose would be. Honestly, like, it might be the smarter thing. If Sai would assume, if you can't hear the elevator door opening, you'd hear the noise of it traveling. So let's think about what we know. Sai definitely has an attic key. He can make his way into the attic. Can he enter the bedroom? Atsuki was assuming that Sai would be in possession of the key of the bedroom at this point. So the only thing stopping him would be the chain. We know Akaro broke through it in like 5 seconds, but Akaro seems a lot stronger than Sai. That being said, either of them are risky because staying inside the elevator is the assumption that Sai wouldn't check it. Which may be true, but at the same time, if he does check it, we're screwed. What if we stay inside the elevator but hold the door closed? If we manage to hold the door closed, that assuming that's how the elevator works, I think, though kind of from what I've understood, the elevator does have a kind of a normal elevator thing, which kind of has like the things closing. And then it also has a door that you open after you've gone through kind of the like automatically closing things. So if we keep that door closed, even if Sai would attempt to open it, we could like keep that held shut and then like press a button, still go to the attic. I'm not sure that the game would play out like that, but I actually prefer staying inside the elevator. When Atsuki ran down through all the buttons, he realized there was one he hadn't considered. Above the others, a red button with the word stop immediately grabbed his attention. The stop button! We can be safe if we lock ourselves here. Shira's eyes widened in amazement. Both of them had failed to recall its existence. They thought back on Kate's words. He told them that if the button was pressed while the elevator was moving, only an entity from outside the tower could enable it again. Before Sai had time to arrive and open the door, Atsuki rushed to press the floor 4 button. Oh, I hadn't considered that one, actually. That was solely due to begin motion, since stopping it while stationary might have left the outer button functional. As soon as they departed the 3rd floor, Atsuki pressed the stop button. Without any delay, the whole structure abruptly ceased moving and kept itself suspended between the 3rd and 4th floors. There we go, it worked. Both of them breathed with relief. An inaccessible elevator in the middle of an inaccessible tunnel, they'd reached the safest position within the tower. Like Kate said, no connection with the outside occurred because it's something the alarm disabled. We'll have to wait until the front door opens to be rescued, but that's more than okay. Shiria agreed with a faint voice. They knew they had slightly more than 3 hours to go, and the narrow elevator was all the space they had. Deciding to rest as best they could, they put their shoes on and let their bodies drop until they sat on the floor. After the elevator had stopped, not the faintest external sound had been heard. Their bodies were still tired, so despite the long wait, they knew they could wade through it with ease. Leaning on opposite corners, they let their bodies loosen, starting to feel their heartbeats slowing down. Both of them wanted to talk to the other, but didn't do so. Instead, they used their imaginations to explore what they'd do after escaping. Shiria had been living in Atsuki's house for a week, and they'd never set an end date. She hoped she could stay with him for a little bit longer without being a bother. In the meantime, Atsuki's mind kept going to what they talked about hours previously. It had been so long since they'd visited their old cabin that he really felt a strong desire to go back there with her. But he knew what had been happening around them. He knew that for some reason Sai wanted them dead. He'd somehow acquired a knife and abused the Sekimeiya's powers. It was very unlikely he could reach their position, but depending on his true motives, the chase might have continued even after exiting the tower. After all, it appeared that the cameras hadn't been working, and with the aid of the Sekimeiya, Sai could have known how to avoid being caught by the police. Even if they'd outsmarted him once, it was impossible to feel at peace yet. Minutes started to pass. Not a thing had reached their ears, but as they were between two floors, it was unlikely even a loud sound could have. Every now and then they'd raise their heads to check on each other. It was impossible to keep a comfortable position, so they continued slightly adjusting themselves. As soon as Atsuki realized that he was still thirsty, he knew he wouldn't be able to get out of his mind. He was about to attempt some small talk by saying it, but stopped himself, as it could have made Shiria feel the same way. A few more minutes went by. Atsuki didn't know how long they'd been in the elevator. Without a watch and given how tired they were, it was far too difficult to tell. Any range from 10 to 20 minutes seemed possible to him. But a sudden dark atmosphere began to creep up on them. With a broken sense of time, Atsuki remembered one of the most mysterious events they'd experienced. They had listened to a recording that had claimed the exit would never open, that the alarm's effects would be permanent. When he'd made the rush decision of activating the emergency stop functioning of the elevator, he hadn't thought of it. If it was legitimate, nobody was going to let them out. When the thought came to him, Atsuki's heart began to speed up again. Had Shiria thought of it? He couldn't tell her. In less than a minute, the claustrophobic sensation had begun to invade Atsuki's body. Are you okay? Yes, don't worry. Shiria noticed he started to take deeper and faster breaths. The decision was irreversible, but the process to learn it, if it had been the correct one, was what began to assault Atsuki. Had his finger already sealed their fate? He didn't know how much longer they'd have to wait to find out. Atsuki began to sweat nervously as he imagined the terrifying scenarios they could have already caught themselves in. How long until 2100? If they could be sure that that point in time would mark the end of their suffering, reaching it wouldn't be an issue. As soon as Atsuki had thought of the not unlikely worst scenario though, every second had begun to feel unbearable. Would they die inside the elevator if help never came? It should have been impossible. After all, if the recording was legitimate and they'd spend a month in the tower, it must have also been true that Atsuki would survive until it occurred. However, what about Shiria? She hadn't been mentioned in it. Atsuki was used to feeling betrayed by his own mind. Shiria had been wearing a neutral expression, but if in 3 hours nothing happened, what would it morph into? Would he be the only one to survive after seeing his friend deteriorate? The rational part of him denied it. There was no food anywhere, and none of them could survive for so long, yet he couldn't relieve any of his worries. He stood up and stretched his body as much as he could. Maintaining the verbal silence, he sat back down. His mind begged for noise, the lack of anything else happening driving him mad. He wasn't sure how much longer they had to wait for. Perhaps they'd been inside for half an hour. As much as he wanted the time to pass, he knew an inevitable time would come. Almost 2100. The uncertain period of time in which nothing would be known. Was it past 2100 and they were already doomed? Was the way out about to unlock? How could they know? If it was truly never going to open, when would they know it? Would they have to wait for 6 hours before being sure that their perception of time hadn't shattered? He didn't know what to think. Nearby, Sai might have been trying to find a way to kill them. Could it be that he wouldn't let the exit open precisely to achieve that? The tendency Atsuki had to overthink everything made for the perfect paranoid mind. Beyond everything, thinking about a reality in which they'd be trapped there forever, sharing a long and agonizing end while he could only blame himself, was the most petrifying conclusion he could imagine. And it wouldn't occur. He had spent the past few minutes with his eyes closed when he opened them after a sudden noise. What? He looked up. A knife had been stabbed into his chest, one gripped by a hand. When it was taken out, blood began to pour out of him, wetting his shirt. A cold and simultaneously hot pain invaded his whole torso. He couldn't comprehend what had happened and looked at the blood in disbelief. Then his gaze turned to Shiria's expression. It was one he'd never seen on her. His mind fell into disarray as he frantically looked around the cramped space. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The situation was so laughable that he couldn't bring himself to scream or utter a word. Flickering shreds of sound began to fill his ears while his sight blackened. No, why? Those words echoed within himself, unable to be released. He opened his eyes to confirm it one more time. Indeed, what he saw was a senseless nightmare. Every scenario he'd thought of had been erased. Atsuki felt a disconnect from reality, as if his body had been hijacked. Without the strength to resist, he gave out on keeping hold of himself, and as soon as he collapsed to the ground, his consciousness burst like a bubble. Personal paradox. Okay. So that was kind of like an ending to the game, but it automatically sets me back to the last choice I can take. All right. So I didn't necessarily need to make the save points, but if we actually reach like a positive thing and can kind of continue going down a different path, we like to eventually check out the other alternatives, possibly. Now, it does say personal paradox, which I find interesting, because that would imply that maybe I don't actually know what it implies. Thought for a second maybe Atsuki, a second version of Atsuki himself came to stab him, which is actually, yeah, paradoxical. I have no other ways to describe that. What I thought actually happened, and what I think happened, which I'm not sure if it's true, but what I think happened is that Shiria herself, not the Shiria that was actually with us, but a future version of her. So basically the version we've seen while we were in the event room and Shiria was sleeping, the other version of her had used the Sekimeiya to travel back in time to a place where, past real Shiria had been before in the elevator and killed Atsuki. That's the only reasonable explanation I can think of. I don't know if it's true, but I'm going to go with that until I'm proven otherwise. Anyway, I've been recording for almost 3 hours, so I'll end this session here. It was incredibly exciting. Well, exciting, nerve-wracking. I enjoyed it a lot. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone on for 3 hours. And yeah, I can't wait to see how other things go. The interesting part there was that I think this kind of narrative version was already kind of telling us, okay, this is not going well, we're dead. But I think this narrative version continued before this. So I think this choice will also lead to our death, potentially, and then we'll get bumped back one more checkpoint, potentially, to just touching the Sekimeiya. I think that's possibly what's going to happen. We'll see. Maybe that just works and everything's fine. But yeah, we'll make a little save, obviously in this section right here. Save. There we go. And yeah, hope you enjoyed watching. Thanks for doing so, and I'll see you guys again next time. Till then, bye.